Welcome back, AP. Yeah, so here in about like 3 minutes, about 3 minutes of time, you're going to see the background change, and you're going to see me go like, welcome back, AP, yet again, and you're going to hear me blabber on about how much I think you guys are awesome, and how good you've been doing, and how like challenging to absolute authority, and blah, 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 blah. Because I was actually a slide off when I originally recorded this flip, and I'm not about to record the entire thing again, because it was actually like money. It was good stuff. All right, so we're going to just start right here, keep going, and then when it hits welcome back AP and does it again, all right, just keep doing your thing and pretend it never happened. I know I'm going to catch so much flack from the following people tomorrow about this. Kieran Garrity, Laura, probably Grace, but it'll all be subconscious. Haley. And we all know Lucas is going to explode. All right, so now, anyway, so we left off talking about Charles. He comes in following the death of James, right? Absolute authority. He's constantly challenging everything. I hate Puritans. I hate Parliament, blah, 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 right? So Charles is considered one of the biggest tools in all of, like, history, right? Spoiler alert, only king to ever be executed by his own people up to this point in history, right? Now, he actually dissolved Parliament, just like King Shane Slack the First did. Shane Slack the Second. Shane the Second, right? Actually did the same exact thing, right? He ruled without Parliament 3 separate times and dissolved them each time or fired them, right? Which actually what Denny said in class is very, very poignant, which is completely legal and within his right, okay? Like, he had the right to actually dissolve what he believed to be a corrupt Parliament. Now, anyway, but the big thing is he also believed in divine right along with his father. He pissed the English off out the gate because he married a 15-year-old French Catholic, which actually got him wrapped up in a lot of other economic issues and as well as foreign policy issues. He listened to the Duke of Buckingham, James's main squeeze there for a little while, a little bit too much, and was constantly strapped for cash, right? He always wanted to wage war, or he wanted to increase the royal funding, or he wanted to do a lot of different things, right? Now, but every time the Parliament would refuse to up taxes to support him, he would dissolve them. And he would actually, like, fire them immediately and send them home packing. Now, like I said, he did this 3 separate times. Now, he also, like, one of the times in particular, was the Duke of Buckingham actually came up to him and he was like, hey, let's go and invade Spain. All right, let's go and invade Spain and stop off in France, invade them a little bit too, in some little regions where Spain and France are kind of quarreling, right? And I'm going to take 6,000 guys and a lot of money, and we're going to go, and it's going to be fine. All right, so Charles asks for funding for this. Parliament says no. He dissolves them, finds funding on his own through debts, right? Sends the Duke of Buckingham off, and he loses in this invasion terribly, all right? Like, he terribly loses this invasion. It's like the Bay of Pigs level bad, all right? So much so that once they return, the Duke of Buckingham actually is going to be assassinated by one of the officers that was a part of that invasion. Like, he was just sitting there, like, looking at maps and stuff, and then a guy comes up from behind him and stabs the Duke of Buckingham in the chest and kills him, right? So the Duke is going to be eventually assassinated, which leads to Charles resenting the Parliament even further because he starts to believe that they're, like, up to stuff, right? So now, following actually one time when he brought him back, he was forced to sign this thing. It's called the Petition of Right, okay? So the Petition of Right was actually a document that forced Charles to sign by Parliament, said that he couldn't levy taxes or imprison people without cause, right? So he had to have a proper cause approved by Parliament. So it's like an addendum to the Magna Carta, right? It's like an add-on to the Magna Carta. I know that Laura probably said yay twice, and that's good stuff, and I appreciate that. Now, but it forced Charles to sign it, which is considered like a blip in English history, but it's still a very important document. And immediately after, he ends up actually dissolving Parliament, and he fires them again. Oh, and guess what? Welcome back, AP. Oh, man. It's been a minute, right? Hi, Mala. How are you? So, it's been a minute since we've had a flip, right? Now, a lot of that just having to do with the fact that we were working on that map, following the Treaty of Westphalia stuff, right? We were working on a lot of different things, right? And I know we reviewed heavy today in class, so you could get your donuts on and stuff like that, and so we could, like, kind of just get all the lead up to this again. Now, what we discussed in class today, we were talking about the Petition of Right. Charles I, James I, James VI, if anybody's asking in Scotland, right? Talked about the religious divides that he dealt with, talked about the fact that they believed in their divine right to rule as kings, right? Even though, ironically enough, I'm going to eat these gushers while we talk about this, ironically enough, they actually had no legal representation or ability to do this, right? We talked about in class too, or at least I hope we did, because I'm doing this beforehand. Spoiler alert. Now, there it goes. We talked about how the Magna Carta is the thing that prevents a king from being able to establish complete divine right to rule in England, right? Now, Oh, man, one of those gushers is busted open already. So, we left off talking about, though, Charles I in his reign, right? Very weird cat, very feeble, sickly kid, right? Very resentful of his father, thought he was extra, all this other stuff. Well, we talked about how he took this idea of divine right to rule to a whole new limit. His father actually really just wanted to try and assert his authority all the time when he was like, no bishop, no king, tobacco's bad for you, don't try and blow me up, like stuff like that, right? But he never actually did what Charles did, which was dissolving Parliament, right? And we talked about in class how this is not unusual. Parliament had been dissolved before, especially when kings and parliaments couldn't agree. However, in the Magna Carta, it states that the Parliament is the one who actually decides to raise or lower taxes, right? So a king actually has no ability really to do anything without them. So the funny jockeying back and forth between the Parliament and the king really actually represents much more of a jockeying back and forth between the wealthy and the poor, right? Because while they were getting into these big scuffles over impositions and tonnage and poundage and things like that, right? The thing about it is a lot of it had much more to do with the fact that this was a feud between the House of Commons and the king, right? A House of Commons that had a growing Puritan majority, had a lot of really, really big, what's the word I'm looking for? Agreeances with the poor of England, right? So that's what this much more represents. So following the Petition of Right, Charles, go figure, decides that he's going to fire Parliament again, right? So this is not the first time he's done this, as we know. Now, he is actually going to rule without them for 11 years, right? Rules without them for 11 straight years. Now, this period from 1629 to 1640 was actually known as the 11 years of tyranny. Or that's what most people coined it as anyway, because he shut the doors to Parliament and refused to actually allow them to come in. Now, and actually raise Parliament in a year that they actually attempted to. So, going forward, sorry, I'm just double checking on some dates real quick. Not those, some ones later. The way he's going to do that, though, a lot of y'all are asking, like, wait a minute. But he wanted to, fight all these wars. He wanted to, get his boy Duke of Buckingham to invade Spain at one point. It was like the English Bay of Pigs, right? So, the big thing about it is, there we go. Sorry about that. The big thing about it is he's going to do that by doing a few things on his own. He's going to actually try and up, like his father did, a lot of taxes on trade, which he actually called ship money, right? So ship money was actually a tax that anybody who wanted to dock inside of England had to pay, right? Funny thing about it, stupid idea, considering the fact that, they would just go port somewhere else, all right? So coronation fines, which every time if somebody was to be knighted, he would actually charge them a very large amount. Didn't work out for him very well because not many people were being knighted frequently. He also is going to grant monopolies on products to certain people, but industrialism wasn't even a thing yet, so not like a monopoly had any major effect. His biggest way to raise revenue was debts and promises, and what I mean by that was he borrowed a lot of money from nobles in England as well as from other countries that he allied with, particularly the French, because, his wife's from there. So going forward, though, it's not going to work for very long, right? Mainly when this thing hits, right? The Book of Common Prayer. All right, now, the Book of Common Prayer was something that had already existed, right? The Book of Common Prayer was a religious set of practices by the Anglicans, actually brought in under Edward VI, the last Tudor king. But the thing about it is, he was going to try and use it to actually push it on top of the Presbyterians as well, right? So, him being a Scottish descendant himself, decides that to try and make sure that the Presbyterians in the north of Great Britain and Scotland were not violating any of the pseudo-Catholic rules of the church, they decide to enforce this thing called the Book of Common Prayer, right? Now, funny enough, the Book of Common Prayer, none of the Scots really had a problem with any of the ideas except for the vaguely Catholic ones, right? Because remember we talked about how Anglicanism is like diet Catholic, right? So, for example, the Presbyterians got very fired up when in the Book of Common Prayer it asked for wooden altar pieces to try and consecrate the Eucharist, when Presbyterians don't believe that the Eucharist needs to be consecrated by a priest at all, right? So that was a really, really big flare-up in particular. But what's going to end up happening is Scottish Presbyterians are going to begin to revolt. And this is going to happen in churches. They're going to burn a lot of churches down. They're going to attack a lot of Anglicans that live in Scotland as well. And they're going to begin to deliberately revolt against the crown. So what does Charles have to do to try and quell this entire rebellion? To fight them off, he has to bring Parliament back, due to the fact that he has to be able to raise a small military and also pay for this small incursion into Scotland to stop this entire rebellion, right? Well, that's going to usher in this thing called the Triennial Act, right? So the Triennial Act was actually passed by Parliament, forcing Parliament to actually reconvene every 3 years minimum. So Parliament believes that they've got the Stuarts, right by the throat, and they're like, all right, you got to bring us back every 3 years no matter what. Agree or we're out. So he actually agrees to it. And what actually ends up happening later is a new rebellion rises up in Ireland, right? The problem with this whole thing is Charles does not have the appropriate amount of power to try and stop two rebellions on two different fronts. You have the Irish Catholics revolting out in Ireland, and you have the Scots that are revolting in Scotland, right? So to try and stop this, though, he decides, wait a minute, you know what I bet's wrong with this whole thing? And he begins to actually accuse Parliament members of stirring the pot. So what he actually ends up doing is he accuses 5 parliamentary officers of starting this rebellion, of giving money to the Catholics and the Scots that had actually been pretty docile up to this point to start this entire rebellion. Well, it was just a rumor, because it turns out that that actually didn't happen, even though he actually tried to run into Parliament one day and arrest 5 members of it. Now, keep in mind, this is actually right after Parliament forced him to actually sign a death warrant for one of his closest advisors. So one of his closest advisors actually was accused of treason by the Parliament, arrested and imprisoned in the Tower of London. And they said, you have 2 options. Either defy us and we will go over you, which would impugn your authority, or sign this death warrant for his execution. And so he reluctantly signs it. With a very heavy heart, he signs it. He watches one of his friends actually go to the axe and gets beheaded, right? So he never actually fully bounced back from that, and he accuses 5 members of Parliament. He's like, you know what? I bet you actually started these rebellions, and I'm going to show up, and I'm going to arrest you, and then we're going to kill all 5 of you in front of everybody, right? Trying to show his power back. But the funny thing is he hesitated. Before he went in, from what I was told by a college professor, he knocked on the door, and instead of just storming in there to get them. So since he hesitated, the 5 people inside of there actually heard that he was on his way, actually heard that he was coming to arrest them and possibly have them executed. And so what they did is the most anticlimactic thing in all of European history. They ran out of a back door. Just 5 old white guys just scurrying out of a back door, being like, oh, tip-top cheerio, and then they just run off out a back door. And what actually ends up happening is, due to this extreme amount of embarrassment, because actually, you know what's really funny too? Charles had to be convinced by his wife to actually even go in there in the first place. Humiliated, he actually flees to northern England and decides, you know what, I'm going to raise an army. I'm going to raise an army, and I'm going to take Parliament, and I'm going to kill a bunch of them, and I'm going to put people that support me in power, right? Well, to fight him off, another army was forming in London of parliamentarians, parliament forces, right? Which is going to usher in the English Civil War. And the English Civil War is actually going to break out due to these political disputes, right? This fight for supposed absolutism. So tomorrow, we are going to get into this a little bit more. We're going to talk about the fighting forces, and we're going to talk about like major battles, big leaders. We're going to get into Oliver Cromwell and his rump parliament over the weekend, right? As of right now, it is looking like your next test will be on Parliament over the weekend, Monday, flip, Tuesday, Thursday. It is looking like your next test will be on Thursday of next week, okay? Your absolutism test will probably be Thursday of next week. And then we're actually going to pick up something else on Friday, and then we're going to kind of get to work on something else, and we're going to make like a little review game thing out of it. I really like these ideas of doing assessments by review game instead of actually doing assessment by like big quiz and stuff. But we actually got to talk about some of the early Enlightenment thinkers as well as the scientific revolution thinkers that you probably actually already heard of, and I just want to kind of brush over them really quickly and then keep on moving. Deal? All right, good stuff. Very proud of you guys. Keep kicking butt. Knock on wood that we stay ahead. But as of right now, you guys are like a solid still 2.5 weeks ahead of where we were last year. So keep crushing it. Very impressed. Stupid proud. But we will pick up on this stuff later. I'll see you guys on tomorrow. All right, so y'all have a good one.